thank you very much for joining us today. We are going to have a really informative conversation from Mr. Jeremy Craig from Test Takers in Singapore. We're going to first have a deep dive into some of the data that he's been working on, and then we're going to learn more about the SAT prep program that we're going to be offering this summer at Dulwich College, Shanghai Pudong. So this is a partnership that we set up this academic year with Jeremy and Test Takers. I've known Jeremy for a number of years now, and you know, as we have conversations with students and parents about taking the SAT and doing SAT prep, and about what the proper timeline is for that, and how much test prep is too much test prep, and all these other really relevant conversations. We couldn't find a better partner that aligns better with us in terms of, you know, our beliefs and our values and our philosophy around test prep. I think, you know, as Jeremy will probably get into, some of the biggest errors that students make is by over investing in test prep to their own detriment. And so, you know, I think it's important to engage in test prep for sure. And as Jeremy's data is going to share in a little bit, SAT is certainly coming back in full force with relevance in highly selective institutions in the States. And so for that reason, we wanted to make sure that we didn't only give you a recommended timeline, which is in year 12 to be doing your SAT prep and taking SATs, but we also wanted to build a pathway, you know, that aligns with our timeline. And so we offered the first round of test prep with Jeremy and Test Takers in January of this year, and that went very well. We had a cohort of about 5 students, and now we are going to run it again in July for the summer session. So with no further ado, I'm going to hand it over to Mr. Jeremy Craig and let him woo you with some data and some insights, and then run through the program and let you know a little bit more about that as well. Over to you, bud.
Okay, thank you very much, Luke, for the kind introduction. And if you all indulge me, we're going to be doing a bit of a deep dive on some of the data that I've collected about top-down analysis on university admissions trends, and specifically how testing has been kind of bandied about during the last 3 or 4 years as the situation has just gotten much more complicated with COVID. So in terms of an agenda, we're going to be doing, so again, the top-down analysis first. Then I'm going to be doing an introduction to the new format digital SAT that everyone is now facing. A little bit about the delivery, a little bit about the format, a little bit about the scoring, and then most importantly, going to be delving into how to best prepare for the SAT. And like Luke said, the single mistake that people make oftentimes is to start prepping too early. Long story short, the test covers what you learn in school, and the more school that you do, generally the better you score without doing any prep whatsoever. And then we'll have a little chit chat about the prep program that we're planning in Pudong. How's that for using the same letter? And then a little bit of Q&A at the end. I'm not sure if you're going to open up to everybody. And then, of course, this will be recorded. You'll get my email address. If anyone has any other questions, you can certainly reach out that way. Now, basically, you go in the Wayback Machine to 4 years ago. COVID's going on, and the universities could not require a test that people can't take. So pretty much all universities went what's called test optional. Some of them, including the University of California, went test blind, which was more of a political decision than anything else. And since COVID, and we've all kind of stuttering back to normal, the Georgetown, MIT, Florida, and Georgia publics, so the publicly funded universities, have all gone back to requiring the test, as had Tennessee. And then more recently, there's been a steady drumbeat of the most selective of American universities starting to say, you know what, we need another metric again. So you see Dartmouth, Yale, Brown, University of Texas, Austin, Harvard, Caltech, and Cornell. And that was probably going to be about it for this coming season. But we anticipate more schools jumping on board next year, as the schools I mentioned here have effectively taken the PR heat shield. They've taken all the hits for this. The broad justification, first of all, is that grades in America are hopelessly inflated. I just read an article this afternoon. The College Board estimates that 60% of American university applicants have a 4.0 average. So they have an A average. If 60% have an A average, how do you differentiate between students from school A and school B, and even between students in the same school if everyone has a perfect score? Obviously, if you're doing A levels or IB, that's a little bit different, but they do want to see that added metric just to verify the scores that are given by the schools. Also, one interesting argument, particularly from Brown and Dartmouth, that are some of the more liberal schools on this very small list, was saying that a lot of students who otherwise would have gotten in weren't submitting SAT scores because they thought that their scores were too low, and then as a result, they didn't get in. So what they're saying basically, if students who go to a disadvantaged high school somewhere in rural America or urban America who are good for their year, but they just don't have the access to people like me and the great teachers, if they score well on the SAT, they might score 1250 or 1300. If you look at that within the range of the broader cohort or applying to those schools, that might not be considered very good. However, schools look at SAT scores within the context from whence they came. So if you score 1250 and you're from rural West Virginia, that's going to be far superior for the kid that scores a 1480 from Stamford, Connecticut. So they're going to look at those things in context. And the whole argument against the SAT is it penalizes kids that don't have access to good support and good prep. However, what they're finding is by not looking at SAT scores, they're missing out on a lot of these students. So that's a kind of a nuanced argument. And you can read the big academic papers that Brown and Cornell come up with to justify all this. Now, despite the fact that the test technically became optional for so many schools, if you look through the common data sets, and that's the data that all universities release back to the US government, and they kind of collate it, make it available for data nerds like me. And I went through and I looked at the top 200 schools by admit rate, and I got rid of schools that require the SAT, like your Florida and Georgia publics. I also got rid of schools like University of California that don't look at it at all. So these are all schools that have a stated policy of being test optional. Now, if you look at the top 20 of those schools, 70% of students who enrolled submitted SAT scores, and the admit rate is 6.5%. And then I separated it down in the top half by the top 10, 20, 30, 20, 40, 60, et cetera. So even if you look at the top 200 schools, over half of successful applicants are still submitting SAT scores. If you're looking at it in more sort of quadrants, working your way down, you see even school 151 to 200, over half are submitting SAT scores, and the admit rate is 83%. So there are only about 50 or 60 schools in America that are really, really competitive. And there are about 3,000 other ones, of which half of them are great and will accept just about anyone with a good IB score who isn't going to burn the place down. So I always encourage you, certainly look at those most selective schools, but also look at schools that maybe other people are not looking at. And you're going to be working with Luke and his team to come up with a real viable list that contains schools that are great that not everyone else in Asia or in China is applying to. And that's the key thing. Now if you look at the score submission rate for the Ivies, now, the Ivy League are 8 schools that play sports against each other, not terribly well. It's an athletic conference, and that's all it is. And it's used for great effect for marketing. But at the end of the day, these are some of the oldest schools in America. And you look here that after the dip you saw with COVID in 2020-21, it then steadied out about 80%. We're predicting this is going to go up to more like 90 next year. You see that some of the percentages are over 100% because some applicants think that they need to submit SAT scores and ACT scores, which is crazy town, but they're doing that anyway, okay? Now, the applications, if you look at the number of applicants, so the number of applicants hasn't really gone up, but the number of applications has. You see that this is a select list. You can look on my blog for the listing of which schools I draw from. But you see from 2020 up to 2022, there was a 15% increase in the number of applicants to the most rejected schools. There aren't 15% more students. There's a 15% increase in applicants. The reason being, a lot of students, maybe they didn't score super well on the SAT, but they figure, you know what? Mom says I'm smart. I'm going to go ahead and apply to Harvard anyway. And what happened was there was a massive boom of the number of applicants to these schools that we'll see in a minute. Now, schools like NYU are never going to say, please don't apply. We don't want your application. Universities are never going to say that, because the more applications they get, the lower their admit rate, and the lower their admit rate, the higher their rankings. And they're all doing the same thing. So it takes a very, very brave school to do what Cornell and Brown and Yale have done, because that's going to result in a slight decrease in the number of applications that they get. But when you're Dartmouth or Yale, you don't really care very much, whereas other schools might have a more of material impact. So you see, here's the application by year to large privates. So this process and this trend has been going for a while. And my supposition, my basic thesis is that COVID accelerated what was already happening. So you see here that the top line is NYU. If you go back to 2014, NYU had about 50-odd thousand applications. Now it's a little bit over 100,000. So the number of applications to NYU has roughly doubled in the last 10 years. It's going to keep going up, but the number of seats in downtown New York for NYU students has not gone up. Now, to their credit, they've opened up some overseas campuses, but that hasn't really gone up. So you see the overall trend is a flight to perceived quality, whereas schools that 15 years ago were commuter schools like Northeastern, now are getting upwards of 100,000 applicants, right? So this trend is kind of going amongst these schools. And as the number of students, number of applications goes up, the admit rate also falls. So you see the admit rate now for the Ivies is just about 5%. For your small, mid-privates, a little under 10. And there's a lot more variance with the publics and large privates. And again, if you look on my blog post, you'll see how I group these schools. A little bit arbitrary, but that's just how we group it. Now, what's also happening is yield percentage. I'm even going to get into too much. I just read today that University of Illinois accepted too many students, and they had an entering class that was bigger than they anticipated. So in order to offset that, the following year has to be 500 kids less, because otherwise they run out of room in the dormitories. So there's going to be a little bit of like bouncing up and down in terms of the number of applications you're going to see year on year and people getting in. Now, most schools, something Luke and I might talk about this next school year, most schools will not release how many international students or applicants they get and what their international admit rate is. This is a state secret for most schools. University of California have a very, very good data kind of sharing policy. So look at UC Berkeley, which is in green. UC Berkeley in 2005, they accepted a little over a quarter. Now they accept about 12%. So that's halved over time. But if you look at UC Berkeley International, that went from a little bit under 15% down to a little bit over 5%. And that's going to be the hard blue color there. And of that 5% who are getting to UC Berkeley, we've done counts. A good chunk of those kids are track and field athletes from all over the world. They're soccer players from Mexico. They're international students to help them beat USC at their various sporting events, right? So a good chunk of these international students are sports affiliated. Long story short, it's just much more difficult to get into the most rejected schools as an international student, but the schools will not necessarily tell you that because they want your application. Now, gender, this is something that I found interesting, something that's not really reported that much, is that at the more hippy-dippy liberal arts schools, it's much easier to get in as a guy than a woman, because some schools, I think that Tulane is now 65% female. And they really want to be about 50-50, but they just can't, because they're not getting enough qualified young men who are applying. So you see that Brown and Yale, there's a real material difference. And then on the flip side, if you look at the more STEM-oriented schools, you see that the chance of getting in as a woman is better than as a guy. And it doesn't mean you're going to get into Caltech if you're a woman, obviously. It's just statistically much easier to get in. So something to always have a look at. I encourage you to look at your schools on your list and go into the school common data set. Just do insert name of school, common data set, and you can pull all of this information from it. And this is often information that the schools are obviously going to know about, but they're not going to list on their websites, because that's a marketing exercise. You want to find out what the nitty gritty is on the actual applications and how you can use that to your advantage. The common data set also has information about early applicants, early decision, all that jazz. I'm not even going to talk about that now, because that deserves a whole other presentation. Now, we're going to turn now and talk a little bit about the SAT. The digital SAT has been around for about a year. It's a good product. They were able to shorten it down. You take it on a computer, now it's a little bit over 2 hours, so down from 3 hours. You still take it at a test center. So you rock up with your own laptop, you have an app that you download, you open it up in the test center, you log in, you take the test, it locks down your computer, and then you walk out. Now, the scoring is on the same range of 400 to 1600 that is going to be equivalent to the old SAT. And they're making sure that the old scores are the same as the new scores. And again, like I said earlier, most universities in America are still technically test optional. What we're finding in reality, this really means is test preferred, particularly if you're coming from an affluent school in China and you have every benefit. They're really looking for that good SAT score just to back up your IB results as well. Okay, so again, you download the test app. On the test day, you go there and take the test. And then about 2 weeks after you take the test, the scores are then sent to you via email and available on the College Board website. The advantage of doing on a computer is a couple. Well, first of all, test integrity. The test that student here is taking is going to be a little bit different than the test the student next to him is going to be taking. It should surprise no one. There's been some cheating scandals on exams over the years, particularly in Asia. And by making sure that each test is a little bit different, they're able to get rid of those concerns. Also, by making it on a computer, you can make the score be a little bit adaptive in that you don't need to take as long a test to get a score back. We'll talk about that in just a minute. In terms of the format, it starts with 2 reading-writing sections. Those reading-writing sections have 27 questions each. So it's really 27 passages, and you have to answer a question about each one. Then you have a 10-minute break. I encourage everyone to take your full 10 minutes. And then following that, there are 2 35-minute math sections with 22 questions each. So it's really just about 100 questions. And performance on the first of the 2 modules or sections will determine which questions you get and which module you get for the second one. So what we found, again, the scoring is very much a black box, but missing an easy question is worse than missing a hard one. You can get a couple hard questions wrong and still get a really great score. But if you get a number 3 wrong, you're already down 30 or 40 points. There's also a Desmos calculator tool that is embedded in the testing app that we have a whole section. We have a whole kind of lecture on how to use Desmos most effectively, just to make sure that you can knock all those questions out very easily. It's very easy to skip around within the individual module, but once you finish the first module, that's it. You can't go back to it. Now, this is sort of my little flow chart about how the test scores. So if you do well on the first module, it's like making it to the second stage of Hunger Games or something, or Squid Games. And then you go the green route. And then the second module is going to be harder. It's going to be a mixture of medium and hard questions. And even if you get to the second module and get everything wrong in the second module, your minimum score is effectively locked in. It's not actually 400, it's more like 500 or so. And then you're going to be able to challenge for that maximum score of 800. However, if you don't do well on that first module, then you're effectively relegated to second division and you're relegated to the easier second module. Then even if you get everything right on the second module, your maximum score is 600. So it really is important that you get off to a strong start. And a lot of what we focus on isn't so much how to do the questions, it's which order to do the questions, when to use techniques, when to use strategies to make sure that you aren't making a bunch of silly mistakes and you're maximizing the number of questions you get right. It doesn't matter how you get the question right, so long as you get it right. And the other big secret, for every single module, 2 of the questions don't count. They're experimental questions they're trying out for future tests. The problem is you don't know which ones they are. So you have to try equally hard in all of them. Now, how do you prepare if you're 8th, 9th, 10th grade? Best thing, read more. I'll say that again. Read more. Magazine articles, short stories, anything without too many pictures is better than nothing. Does that include TikTok and YouTube? No, it does not include TikTok and YouTube. What you want to do is read more. If you say over the summer, try to read 10 minutes a day for the first week. The next week, try to read 12 minutes a day. Okay, so please mute yourself. Thank you. Okay, so try to read more. Grammar. Your grammar most likely is terrible. The Khan Academy website, the ecosystem there, they have a great English grammar course, and I would encourage you to do the grammar course. Not the SAT specific stuff, just the basic, this is a verb, this is a noun, and it works all the way up through past perfect tense. Math class, pay attention, okay? basically your math is probably going to be okay. The IB math is more advanced than the standard American math curriculum, but there are concepts on the SAT that are tested that aren't necessarily covered in any of the IB math sections, such as circle equations, circles. But importantly, don't do any formal SAT work until at the very earliest, the summer before 11th grade, or for 12th grade for you guys, or IB1. Okay, regular schoolwork will help you with your SAT score, and doing too much work too early gets in the way of doing well in your IGCSEs and doing all the other activities that will make you more focused and well-rounded applicant when the time comes to apply to American universities. The single worst thing you can do is start to do practice tests when you're in 9th grade. It just isn't a good idea for any number of reasons. Now, this is, again, I've been doing this. I started when I was at Columbia back in a lifetime ago. I've been doing this for 30 years. And what we've seen is that scores go up over 25 to 45 hours, then they tend to peak out in terms of SAT prep. And then what happens over time, the scores go down, the scores attenuate. This economic concept of diminishing returns. The more you put into it doesn't necessarily the more you get out of it. If it was the fact that if you just put in 300 hours of test prep that you would get a perfect SAT score, then look around, half of Asia would have a perfect SAT score and the test would mean very little. So we will get your score up to as high as you possibly can get. You'll get that result, and then you move on to the next thing. Okay, to use a sporting analysis, I would play golf better if I practice every day, but I'm just not capable of playing on TV. It's not going to happen, and that's okay. So we'll get you to your maximum score in a quickly and an efficient manner, but you don't necessarily think you need to score a 1580 or your life is over. It doesn't work that way. Now, our program, this is what it looks like. We sort of pioneered these hybrid programs, we call them, where I get on the boat and go up to Shanghai for a week in July. So it meets every day as part of the summer program at Dulwich. You see, we're Monday afternoon on the 22nd on the left-hand side there. Then Tuesday morning, afternoon, Wednesday morning, afternoon, you take a diagnostic test. We go over it real quick. And then in the follow-up to that, we do additional work on Zoom. We might use Teams instead of Zoom. It really doesn't matter for us. So we do additional work in the lead up to that August test date. And that would certainly be appropriate for anyone, say, in the class of 2025 or going into year 13. Those people going into a class of 26, year 12s in August, you might want to hold off and not take the test until October or even December. And then we have similar Zoom review sessions that will lead up to those test dates as well. And if you just look on my website, if you go to Zoom sessions, that will have that information there. Price is about $1,000 US all in, and that covers everything. It covers our test taker's pencil, even our flashcard box that contains the vocab, grammar, and math skills that you need to really excel on the test. Okay, I think everything I just said is right here. Okay, that's New Zealand dollars. I'm not worried about that. It's another program we're trying to get going in New Zealand. And again, all that we do is SAT prep. We don't do university advising. I'm very knowledgeable about that overall process. I don't want to get involved in that because my customer ultimately are the international schools, and you particularly at Dulwich, you're paying a lot of money for Luke and his team who are world class. Okay, so obviously there's an ecosystem going outside the school because the school might not tell you what you want to hear. There's no real benefit to that. The outside consultants, I can count on one hand the people that I would recommend. No one in Asia. Okay, so here, if you scan this QR code, I'll leave that up on the screen. That will get you to our website that has more information on the actual program. And then I encourage you to have a look, once you get to my website, look at the videos for some little short videos on how to prepare and what the test is all about. You can also follow us on LinkedIn. I know it's quite big in China. And I try to cross-post all the information I see about testing and admissions, of which there's new development seems like every day. I try to cross-post it on my LinkedIn account as well, because I'm trying to get myself off Twitter. Okay, so that's my quick and dirty run through of everything. So I will stop sharing screen, I guess. Maybe I'll just leave it up for the QR code. So Luke, I'm sure if anyone wants to put any questions in chat, is that a thing on Teams?
Yeah, we've got a chat running. So if anybody has any questions that they want to ask, they can pop them in the chat. Yes, sir.
And I just did the stop share thing. Okay. Oh, my friends from Suzhou are here. Great. Okay. And then a lot of people ask me about summer activities. A day doesn't go past, I don't see it, someone trying to sell me some sort of summer research project, working with a PhD from some university to do a unique thing. I think those are complete waste of money. And I actually saw a webinar that the admissions woman from Caltech said that if they see that, that's an immediate rejection. So I think over the summer, students should have a summer. I think the best thing they can do is to maybe work at one of your friends' offices, making copies, fetching coffee, maybe do some filing, some data entry, to learn a little bit about the real world and about maybe what they want to do, what they don't want to do the rest of their lives. These summer programs at Hopkins and Harvard and where have you, they're great ways for universities to make some money, right? But they don't help you get into any of these schools. They're broadly speaking, I think they're shills and they're terrible. So, okay, here's one. I